A reminder of our top stories. And the Metropolitan Police has warned the local council and management company responsible for Grenfell Tower that they could face corporate manslaughter charges. The High Court has ruled that terminally ill baby Charlie Gard should be moved from Great Ormond Street Hospital to a hospice where his life support will be withdrawn. Charlie's mother has accused the hospital of denying the family its wish to allow Charlie to die at home. And the EU's Brexit negotiator has warned the next phase of talks with Britain may not begin in the autumn because of a lack of progress in the current negotiations, focusing on the UK's exit bill. Hello there, you're watching The Press Preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the political journalist Isabel Oakeshott and the Observer's chief leader writer Sonia Soda. So hello to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on the front pages, and starting with the Metro. Police are to interview council officials with a view to bringing criminal charges after the Grenfell Tower fire. And it's the same lead for The Guardian. They say the police made the decision after seizing documents and taking witness statements. A warning from academics in the Eye that global regulation is needed after a breakthrough in editing human embryos. EU citizens will still be allowed to come and live in the UK after Brexit as long as they register. That's the lead for The Telegraph. The FT reports that Chancellor Philip Hammond has promised business leaders a phased withdrawal from EU trading relationships even after leaving the Union. Another setback for the Prime Minister in The Times. They're reporting that the Republic of Ireland wants all immigration controls to be solely at ports after Brexit. Drinking alcohol 3 or 4 days a week can significantly cut the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. That's according to new research quoted by the Daily Express. The Sun reports that thieves stole more than £400,000 worth of luxury items from the home of Aston Villa captain John Terry. The Mirror has that statement from Charlie Gard's mother. She says she and her husband have been denied their final wish of spending more time with their son before he dies. And The Star has a story about former Gogglebox star Scarlett Moffat. Lots to talk about there with Isabel Oakeshott and Sonia Soda. So good to see you both. Let's kick off with Brexit, because you've picked out the front page of the Daily Telegraph tomorrow, which focuses on freedom of movement and the question of whether it stops in the spring of 2019 or whether it carries on a bit longer. What's the Telegraph saying?
Absolutely, and this story is in a lot of the papers tomorrow, and not surprisingly really, because the question of immigration and whether we have too much of it and how it should be curbed was really crucial, I think, in the decision by many people to vote for Brexit. And what's happening, the broader political picture is, I think there's a realisation on the part of even the most strident kind of Brexiteer cabinet ministers that there will need to be some kind of transitional phase here. What I think is very important for voters who backed Brexit is that this doesn't lead to a kind of indefinite period where freedom of movement continues in some sort of watered down version, and there will be a lot of concern about that. And that probably explains why there's such different headlines in the papers tomorrow according to what is the viewpoint of the particular newspaper.
Well, yes, because a lot of businesses might be concerned about suddenly have a very sudden stop in freedom of movement if they have been relying on some EU workers in their businesses.
Yeah, so there's that issue. There's what happens where we do have industries which are very reliant on EU workers. But there's also the issue that if we want a transitional deal that continues to allow us single market access and access to the customs union, we're pretty much going to have to sign up to freedom of movement. So the EU is not going to let us have a transitional deal where we get to cherry pick the benefits that we want of EU access to the EU single market, but to ditch the things that we don't like. I mean, that was one of the reasons why we had the Brexit vote in the first place. So I really welcome the sort of newfound pragmatism in some parts of the cabinet, shall we say. Very interesting signals coming from Amber Rudd that we will be seeking a transitional deal, that freedom of movement may well have to continue as part of that. But I think it's interesting the contrast between the headline in the Daily Telegraph, freedom of movement to continue after Brexit, and the headline on page 5 of The Daily Express, where they seem to be saying the exact opposite thing, which is free movement from EU to UK ends in 2 years. And the reason why they're able to support that headline is that there was also an interview by the Immigration Minister on the Today programme this morning, where he was very clear, well, the principle of freedom of movement will end in 2 years. But at the same time, we're also hearing that, well, probably the same arrangements will have to continue. So I think the government is giving incredibly mixed signals on this. It is, dare I say, trying to have its cake and eat it. And I think
to coin a phrase.
I mean, to coin a phrase, but I think it's partly a sign of the mess it's in, and the fact that it's good that we're sort of this position seems to be crystallising from Amber Rudd, and there seems to be growing support for it in the cabinet. But I also think it's very interesting that Michel Barnier has said today that talks are going to have to be delayed, the second stage of negotiations, because
it talks about future relationships
exactly,
and trade
because
talks.
the EU's view is that Britain hasn't even come to a good negotiating position,
well, Sonia,
or a clear negotiating position on the three things that we need to get.
Of course the EU is going to say that. I mean, this is saber-rattling, I think, from the EU at this point.
But there isn't a position, Isabel. We haven't seen one.
Sonia, I don't know what you mean there isn't a position. You know, I get really exasperated by
surely
Remain.
not.
I've never by Remainer saying there's no plan, it's all a mess. Actually, there's a very clear plan. If you talk to cabinet ministers, as I have directly, the cabinet ministers
I wish they'd tell the rest of us
that are in charge of this, and they do. If you actually listen to the Today programme and all the other interviews that they've given
and
in the
Sky
last
News too.
in the last 10 days, and of course on Sky News, there have been plenty of interviews with the Brexiteer cabinet ministers who have set out exactly what the plan is, and we must not allow ourselves to be browbeaten by these trumpeting EU people saying that we're not paying enough.
There's been a little bit of confusion today over the freedom of movement issue. If we're told it will end...
well, actually, if you read what the papers say, and never mind the headlines, you can see what they're saying is that free movement will have to continue during a transitional period, and then post the end of that transitional period, things should change. Now, if there is a betrayal post the end of that transitional period and things just carried on as ever before, I think that whoever was in charge at that time, whether it's this government or another one, would find themselves in serious difficulty.
But it's quite misleading, isn't it, for the Immigration Minister to say this morning, oh yes, freedom of movement ends in 2019, when we all know that that's an impossibility, really, and we've got lots of the cabinet saying there will be a transitional deal that involves freedom of movement. So I just don't think the mixed signals are very helpful.
I think some people want to find mixed signals. Some people are actually relishing mixed signals.
Well, it's
looking for mixed
I mean,
signals.
Look, we've got two headlines
well,
and
that's
two
from the
papers saying
newspapers, not from the
directly
cabinet
opposite
ministers.
things. So I think, you know, but if you can generate two opposite headlines from the government on the same day, it shows how mixed the signals are, doesn't it?
It was ever thus, Sonia. Papers are brilliant at that.
Let's delve inside the Sun, because the next story that you've picked out is focusing on the reports about our prisons today. And the Sun describes it as an all-out scandal.
Yes, that's right. So there are new figures out relating to levels of self-harm in our prisons, levels of assault of prison officers, and it's been on the rise for the last few years. And I think it's very related to the fact that the budget for prisons has been cut. We're now seeing many more prisons with really high rates of overcrowding than we ever have in the last kind of decade before, and that the prison service has also numbers have been reduced. So we've seen prison officer numbers shrink by around a third, again, since 2010. I'm showing off about my statistics here. But this is making our prisons incredibly unsafe places to be, both for prisoners and for prison officers. And actually, it's not fair, because if you're sentenced to serve a prison sentence, you expect to be physically safe while you're doing it. And it's not fair on our prison officers either. So the Sun's got a very good editorial today, I think, where they say that, you know, the government really needs to be investing more in our prisons. And I couldn't agree more.
I would look at this slightly different. You've used the word "it's not fair" twice in relation to this. I actually agree with you about the basic issue of underfunding for prisoners, but I don't see it in terms of fairness for the prisoners. I see it in terms of getting value for money for the taxpayer, and whether there is any point in incarcerating people only to make life worse for them and for the people working for them, and then for them to reoffend. So I really think more money does need to go into the system, and a lot more thought needs to go into rehabilitation, which clearly just isn't happening because of the reoffending rates.
And the other element to this story that has shocked many people was that first thing. They're saying 71 lags, as they put it, let go by mistake. I mean, that's a high figure, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a high figure. I mean, obviously, it has to be put in the context of a prison population of, I think it's about, yeah, I think it's around that, exactly. So, I mean, it's never good to let anyone go by mistake, but I think the figure does sort of require some context.
And talking about the prison population, before we whiz on, is that one of the problems? Are we sending too many people to prison, do you think?
Yes, I certainly think so.
I don't know whether we're sending too many people to prison or not, but clearly we're sending too many people to the wrong kind of facilities. I mean, this comes quite soon after a recent report, doesn't it, on facilities for young offenders, which were equally found to be very, very flawed.
I think we send a lot of people who go to prison at the moment go for periods of under 1 year, and actually what we know is that makes them more likely to become criminal because they're rubbing shoulders with the wrong people. It doesn't rehabilitate them and makes them more likely to reoffend. So I think we should be really looking at sentencing reform and community sentencing and looking for justice and people's to make reparations in other ways, and we know that can be very effective. The problem is it's incredibly politically difficult to reform sentencing, and that's why no government of any political stripe has ever done it. We've had some sort of cabinet secretaries like Ken Clarke, for example, who've made very positive noises about this, but they've never been quite able to deliver.
OK, let's move on to another story actually inside The Sun that you have picked out, and that is the one there at the top?
It's a big, yes, it's a big American aircraft carrier.
Thank you for helping me with that.
I got excited by this because I'm writing a book at the moment on defence, so I'm kind of getting quite interested in this big new aircraft carrier that we've got, the Queen Elizabeth, which is not quite ready for use yet, but is finished. And at the moment, we have this HMS, not HMS, what is it called? Something Bush, anyway.
USS
George Bush, which is off Britain at the moment. And we are effectively sort of using it as a training ground for getting our own Navy personnel used to what life is like on board a huge aircraft carrier. So it's a pretty impressive thing, isn't it? And look how many aircraft there are actually on that. It's not possibly quite easy for viewers to see that, but in great contrast to our own aircraft carriers that currently have no aircraft on them. So it's a big symbol of American military prowess.
A big symbol and a big bill, I noticed there. £4.7 billion is the cost of the carrier. Very quickly, unless you wanted a quick word on the...
I don't think Son is that excited by the
talking about Party Island instead. We've got about 30 seconds.
Yes, so this story is Malia on Crete is trying to reinvent itself. We know it as the destination for stag parties, hen parties. No more, say the authorities in Malia. So they're trying to ban big groups of 18 to 30 British singletons. Yeah, it had a bad rep, didn't it, after it starred in the Inbetweeners movie? It was where the Inbetweeners
is that where that was focused?
Yeah, Malia and Crete, and it didn't paint the sort of best picture, I suppose, of it as a holiday destination, I think it's fair to say.
OK, on that note, we're going to take a break. Lots more to come, though, including, I'm not sure why you'd want to, but apparently it's a bad idea to eat cherry stones. We'll explain why in a moment.